There's a kind of silence that feels like peace. Then there's the kind that feels like suffocation. When I married David, I thought I was walking into the former. His quiet nature had always comforted me in a world full of noise. He wasn't flashy, loud, or overbearing. He was measured, soft-spoken, kind. The kind of man who held doors open, remembered small details, and let me speak without interruption. In a world that constantly demanded attention, he made stillness feel like safety. That's what I thought love was. I met David in Chicago at a little downtown cafe where I'd taken my laptop to escape the chaos of my workplace. I was a graphic designer then, tired, overworked, running on cold brew and unspoken dreams. He was sitting in the corner, reading a book I'd only ever seen my father read. I complimented him on it. He smiled. We talked. And slowly, over months of shared coffee cups and train rides, a quiet rhythm began between us. We married 2 years later. A courthouse ceremony. Just the two of us, my best friend Mia as my witness. His parents said they couldn't make it. Too last minute, they claimed. His sister sent a text, "Congrats." That was all. I should have paid more attention. After the wedding, David suggested we move to Springfield into his family home for a while. Just until we save up, he said. My parents have the space. It'll be temporary. It didn't sit right with me. But I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to believe that this silence I felt from his family was just distance, not disdain. So I packed up my life. Left the city. My work. My routines. My community. I followed him into that house. And I vanished. The moment I stepped through the door of the Langston estate, I knew I didn't belong. His mother, Marlene, greeted us at the door but looked right through me. Not with anger. Not even dislike. With nothing. Like I was a shadow trailing behind her son. His sister, Andrea, sat on the living room couch, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up, nodded, then returned to her screen. There was no welcome. No warmth. No recognition that their son and brother had brought home a wife. The first dinner told me everything. The dining table was set with polished cutlery and folded napkins. Marlene had prepared roast lamb, baby potatoes, steamed carrots. Everything smelled incredible. I stood beside David, waiting for him to introduce me. He didn't. His father said grace. They passed the plates. One by one, food was served. Plates were filled. Mine was left empty. I sat in silence. David didn't notice. Or maybe he did. He just didn't say anything. When I reached for the potatoes, Andrea placed her hand over the bowl and smiled at me. "I'll serve you when I'm done," she said. But she never did. Later that night, I told David how I felt. He wrapped an arm around my shoulder and kissed my temple. "They're just adjusting," he murmured. "It's been just the four of us for so long. Give them time." I gave them weeks. In those weeks, I became part of the wallpaper. Present but unseen. Marlene planned meals without asking if I'd be home. Andrea hosted loud brunches with her friends, occupying the entire house, never once acknowledging me. I'd enter a room and the conversation would pause. Not because I'd interrupted, but because they never considered I'd be there at all. They never used my name. Not once. Even David. He never called me my wife in front of them. Just she or her. As if saying my name might cement my existence in that house, and no one wanted that. I started cooking for myself. Washing my own dishes. Doing my laundry at night when everyone else was asleep. Every item I bought. Bathroom organizers, bedroom curtains, a kitchen blender. I kept receipts for. I started counting things. Documenting. Because something in my gut told me I wasn't building a life there. I was being erased from one. The final straw wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a shouting match or a scandal. It was a Sunday morning. Marlene was hosting one of her monthly women's group meetings. A collection of sharp, polished women in pearls and pastel skirts, sipping mimosas and whispering behind manicured hands. I came down to get coffee. Quietly. Respectfully. Marlene glanced at me from across the room. Then turned to her guests and said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, that's just the house girl. Don't mind her. She keeps to herself." They all laughed. And David? He was leaning against the stairwell. He didn't say a word. That night I packed. Not just clothes. Everything. The air fryer I bought with my bonus. The designer sheets I'd brought from Chicago. The paintings. The bathroom rugs. The mirror in our bedroom. The guest towels I'd ordered online. Every single thing I had ever purchased or brought into that house, I took. Quietly. Systematically. David was out with Andrea. His mother was asleep. His father was in the den with headphones on. I moved like a ghost. No sound. No anger. Just precision. By midnight my car was full. I left the spare keys on the hallway table. Left the wedding band on the vanity. And I drove away. No note. No fight. No explanation. They wanted to pretend I didn't exist? Fine. Let them wake up and find a house stripped of every trace I had ever been there. Let them realize what silence really feels like. I moved back to Chicago. Rented a small apartment in Logan Square. I emailed my old firm. They welcomed me back without hesitation. It was like slipping back into myself. But the story didn't end there. 3 days after I left, I received a message. Not from David. From Marlene. A cold, clipped email accusing me of theft. Threatening legal action if I didn't return stolen property. She attached a list. Every item I had bought. Every receipt I had kept. I smiled. I responded with a zipped folder of my own. PDFs. Invoices. Bank statements. Photos. Timestamps. I made it impossible for them to deny the truth. And I copied David's uncle, a retired judge who had sent us a wedding card I still had. Then I blocked her. A week later I received another message. This time from David. Can we talk, he wrote. We need to fix this. But there was no we anymore. Not after silence. Not after that house. Not after the way he stood beside erasure and called it love. I didn't respond. Instead I started writing everything down. Every incident. Every microaggression. Every moment of dismissal and exclusion. Not for revenge. For survival. Because sometimes the only way to prove you existed is to write yourself back into the story. They wanted to forget me. But I wouldn't forget myself. And I was just getting started. The first week after I left David's family home was blissfully, eerily quiet. I woke up without the weight of dread curling in my chest. No icy stares from Marlene over coffee. No side glances from Andrea silently daring me to react. No silence from David that stung louder than 1,000 insults. For the first time in months I could hear myself think. But silence isn't always peace. Sometimes silence is the breath before a storm. And in the second week it arrived. Not with anger. Not with begging. But with the same cold calculation his family was built on. A legal notice arrived at my apartment. I remember the way the courier looked at me, apologetic like he knew he was handing over something poisonous. It was from David. Or rather from his family lawyer Charles Brandt. They were suing me. For theft. Removal of jointly shared property without consent. They listed household items like trophies, Dyson vacuum cleaner, Vitruvi diffuser, Calphalon cookware set, Samsung 55-inch smart TV. Things I had paid for. Things I had receipts for. Things I had deliberately kept proof of, because some part of me had known this family would never let me leave quietly. I didn't panic. I prepared. I opened the folder I had created before I left. It was labeled, Proof of Self. Inside, every item listed on that legal document had its receipt, time-stamped and cross-referenced with bank statements from my personal account. I compiled the files, created a timeline and contacted a friend, Nadia, who'd gone into family law right after undergrad. She reviewed the suit then looked up at me with disbelief. This isn't a lawsuit, she said. It's an intimidation tactic. They're hoping you'll fold. Hoping you'll pay to make it go away. I didn't fold. I wrote my own response, calm, polite, surgical. In it, I included every document. I refuted every claim with undeniable evidence. And at the end I wrote one sentence that I knew would send chills. Should this escalate further, I am prepared to make public a detailed account of my experience in the Langston household, supported by both documentation and witness testimony. I CC'd David's uncle again, the retired judge who'd once written in our wedding card, "Love should always make room for the truth." The next morning the lawsuit was withdrawn. But the silence returned. And this time it was different. Because David had finally started to unravel. He showed up outside my apartment on a Thursday evening. I saw him through the peephole, shoulders hunched, face pale. He looked thinner. Not physically, but like something inside him had started to collapse. I didn't answer the door. He knocked once. Then again. Then, please can we talk? I leaned against the wall, listening. No apology. No, I'm sorry. Just can we talk, as though conversation could fix what cowardice had broken. Eventually he slid something under the door. A letter. It wasn't handwritten. It was printed. Like even now he didn't know how to speak from the heart. In the letter he said he was confused, that things at home got complicated, and that he never meant for me to feel unwelcome. That Marlene had her own way of showing care. That Andrea was just joking. And then near the end, a single sentence that made my blood freeze. My mother is worried this will affect our family's reputation. Not me. Not our marriage. Their reputation. It was always about optics with them. Appearances. The Langston name was plastered across Springfield. On real estate signs, on bank boards, on hospital wings. I was just a temporary shadow that had wandered into their spotlight. I didn't respond. Instead, I did something far more deliberate. I started telling the truth. Quietly. Strategically. I wrote an essay, not for revenge, not to go viral, but to reclaim my voice. I titled it The Ghost Wife, How It Feels to Be Erased in a Home That Should Love You. I used pseudonyms. Changed locations. Protected identities. But every word was mine. Every truth undeniable. I submitted it to a well-known online magazine. One that Mia, my best friend, had once freelanced for. She connected me to the editor. They published it within days. The piece went semi-viral. Not a wildfire, not a scandal. Just a quiet burn that spread from inbox to inbox. I didn't link my name. But the people who knew, knew. And that included David's extended family. The cousins I'd only met once. The aunt who'd pulled me aside at the wedding and whispered, "If you ever feel lonely in that house, call me." They read it. And they called me. Not to gossip. To thank me. Because as it turned out, I wasn't the first. There had been another woman. Before me. Her name was Alicia. She'd been engaged to David briefly when he was in college. It had ended abruptly. No one ever explained why. But now she reached out to me. Through Instagram. A short message. "Your story, it's mine too. I didn't have the words then. But you gave them to me now." We met for coffee. Alicia was warm, thoughtful. She had the kind of eyes that held too much and said too little. She told me how Marlene had chipped away at her confidence. How Andrea had stolen her belongings, then accused her of misplacing them. How David, quiet, compliant David, had stood by and watched it all happen, convinced that keeping peace was more important than speaking up. "I thought I was crazy," she whispered. "I thought I was too sensitive. But it wasn't me. It was that house. That family." That's when I understood. It wasn't personal. It was generational. Marlene had built a system. A house where control wore the mask of hospitality. Where every woman was tested. Where silence was expected and resistance was punished through erasure. And David? He wasn't her victim. He was her echo. Alicia and I decided to do something. Not expose them. Not destroy them. But document them. We created a private forum. A space for women who had experienced familial erasure, quiet abuse, silencing through kindness. We called it the Ghost Room. Within weeks, dozens of women joined. Some from David's family circles. Others from completely different worlds. It wasn't just about Marlene or Andrea anymore. It was about a pattern that too many women had lived through and never named. We gave it a name. And in that we found power. David tried again. He left voicemails. Texts. Even flowers at my door. I never responded. Because what do you say to someone who watched you disappear and called it complicated? The final blow came quietly. An email from David's cousin Lindsay. She'd read my essay. She'd known something had been wrong at every family dinner but had never spoken up. She apologized for staying silent. And then she said something I'll never forget. "Marlene is furious. She doesn't know how, but your words have made their way through our entire family. She says you're trying to destroy her." But I wasn't. I wasn't destroying anyone. I was refusing to be destroyed. There's a difference. And that difference was survival. For the Langstons, image had always been everything. Marlene's dining room walls were a gallery of curated perfection. Photos of David shaking hands with deans and donors, Andrea receiving academic honors, their father at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Smiles practiced, polished. Frames identical. Lives scripted like press releases. But the cracks had started to show. And this time they weren't mine. The essay I had published under a pseudonym had found its way through the Langston social circle like a breeze slipping through the cracks in an old mansion. Gentle but unrelenting. People whispered not about me but about them. About the way Marlene handled women. About David's passivity. About the eerily similar stories emerging from women connected to the family. It was no longer about revenge. It was about witnessing. Holding up a mirror to a family that had never been forced to look inward. David called again. This time he sounded breathless, like he was chasing a version of me that no longer existed. "Why are you doing this?" he asked in a voicemail. I listened to it twice. He still didn't get it. I hadn't done anything to them. I had simply told the truth. They were the ones unraveling under the weight of it. What surprised me most, though, was who reached out next. Not another cousin. Not another forgotten ex. But his father. Gerald Langston was a man of few words and fewer expressions. The kind of man who could sit in a room for hours without speaking and still command attention. I had never once seen him raise his voice, only his eyebrows. He emailed me. No threats. No apologies. Just a request. "Will you meet with me? Alone. I believe a conversation is overdue." I stared at the screen for nearly an hour. Then I responded with one sentence. "I will listen, but I will not return." We met at a library cafe in Springfield, neutral ground. He arrived 5 minutes early, sat with his hands folded, and didn't speak until I did. "You don't have to explain anything," I said flatly. "I've already lived it." He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the cup in front of him. "I didn't reach out before because I didn't think it was my place." "No," I corrected. "You didn't reach out because it was easier to watch me disappear." He didn't deny it. Instead he exhaled heavily. "You're right. Silence has always been easier in our house. You're leaving. It broke something." I didn't respond. "David's not doing well," he continued. "He lost his job last week." That made me blink. David had always been stable, professional, methodical. "What happened?" "Clients began asking questions," Gerald said. "About his role in a toxic family culture. They couldn't risk the association." I didn't smile. Because I hadn't set out to ruin him. But I also hadn't protected him from the truth he chose to ignore. "I came here," Gerald said after a pause, "not to fix anything, but to say I see it now. What that house does to women. What Marlene became over the years. I failed you by not standing between you and her." "Why now?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time since our wedding. "Because you left," he said. "And because when you left you didn't burn the house down. You just took what was yours and left it standing." That was the loudest silence of all. That night I lay in bed thinking about those words. The loudest silence. That's what my life had become. Not a scream. Not a spectacle. But a refusal to disappear quietly. And it was working. The group Alicia and I had started, the Ghost Room, had grown larger than we ever imagined. Not just survivors of erasure but therapists, counselors, authors. People who wanted to understand the quiet ways women are pushed out of spaces without ever being touched. We hosted our first virtual panel. Over 300 people attended. One woman cried on camera as she described her in-laws slowly undoing her self-worth while smiling at her in every holiday photo. Another talked about her husband's silence as the slowest betrayal imaginable. I watched them, heart clenched. Not out of pain. Out of recognition. We had all lived different versions of the same story. And now we were rewriting the endings. One morning I received a package on my doorstep. No name. No return address. Inside was a manila envelope. It was a printout of my essay, with notes scrawled in the margins. In reading. At first I thought it was hate mail. But as I read the handwriting my breath caught. It was Marlene's. Each note was defensive, dismissive. But near the end one line had been underlined 3 times. I didn't know it felt like this. I didn't know if that was guilt or deflection. But I didn't reply. Because the point wasn't to make her understand. The point was I understood myself now. Then came the dinner invitation. Not to the Langston home. From Lindsay, the cousin who had reached out before. She was hosting a family truth night, as she called it. A gathering of cousins, spouses, and siblings who had witnessed Marlene's reign of silence and were finally ready to speak. I want to break the pattern, Lindsay wrote. And we can't do that unless we confront it. I hesitated. Was it worth reopening the wound? But this wasn't about wounds anymore. It was about inheritance. What silence hands down through generations if we don't intercept it. I agreed to attend. The dinner was held at Lindsay's home, a warm, eclectic space filled with laughter and mismatched mugs. Nothing like the Langston mansion. We sat in a circle, 10 of us. Cousins, partners, former partners. Alicia. Another ex I hadn't met. Even Andrea's former roommate who shared how Andrea had once bragged, if my brother ever brings a girl home she'll leave the way she came, invisible. Each story cracked the porcelain veneer of the family's legacy. Each story proved we weren't isolated. We were part of a pattern. I spoke last. I didn't name names. I didn't accuse. I described what it felt like to be erased. To sit at a table where no one looked you in the eye. To be talked around instead of to exist in the background of your own marriage. And when I finished, the room was silent. Then Lindsay whispered, "We owe you more than silence." 2 weeks later, I heard that Marlene had stepped down from the board of the Springfield Women's Foundation. Officially, it was for health reasons. Unofficially, a letter had been circulated, anonymous, detailing how the foundation's image of supporting women didn't align with board members known for excluding and demeaning their daughters-in-law and nieces. I didn't write the letter. But I didn't have to. Truth multiplies once it's spoken. I still live in Chicago. Still work with my design firm. Still wake up each morning and make coffee without dread. The Langstons have gone quiet. Not out of pride this time. Out of consequence. David hasn't contacted me in weeks. Last I heard he'd moved in with a friend and started seeing a therapist. Maybe he'll find his voice. Maybe he won't. That's no longer my concern. Because justice doesn't always come through confrontation. Sometimes it comes through clarity. Through the slow, steady choice to walk away without apology, without a scene. To take what is yours, leave the rest behind and never look back. That's not weakness. That's power. And I've never felt more alive. There's something haunting about a house that's too quiet. I used to think the Langston estate was elegant. Grand. Regal even. But now when I look back I remember the silence. Not the kind that soothes but the kind that watches. That listens. That waits for you to vanish so it can remain unchanged. Lindsay's dinner had sparked something. Not just in me or the cousins or the women who once tiptoed through the Langston shadow, but in the very structure of the family itself. They were fracturing. And this time no one was rushing to glue the cracks back together. 2 weeks after that dinner, Lindsay invited me to her home again. But this time it wasn't a gathering. Just her. She looked nervous when I arrived. A stack of old photographs and letters lay spread across her dining table. "I found these in my father's attic," she said. "Some of them. I think you should see." I hesitated. Then I sat. The photographs were decades old. Some in color, some faded with age. I recognized Gerald, David's father, in a few. Younger. Smiling. Standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. Not Marlene. "Who is she?" I asked. Lindsay looked at me carefully. "Her name was Ruth," she said. "She was Gerald's first fiancée." I blinked. "David's mom." "No," she said quietly. "David's almost mom." She pushed a stack of letters toward me. Most were love letters. Kind. Thoughtful. Then they changed, abruptly. Ruth's handwriting became shaky. Her tone guarded. One letter stood out. "I can't live in that house, Gerald. Your mother acts like I'm a threat. Like I'm furniture to be moved, not a person to be embraced. I'm sorry. I love you. But I won't be erased." She ended the engagement a week later. Gerald married Marlene less than 6 months after that. A chill crawled down my spine. This wasn't about me, or Alicia, or any of us. This had started long before David was born. I leaned back, staring at the wall behind Lindsay. "They were raised in this," I murmured. She nodded. Marlene wasn't always like this. But that house, it hardened her. Ruth threatened her control. "So did you." I exhaled slowly. For the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt grief. Not for what I'd lost, but for the women who came before me. The ones who didn't leave. The ones who silenced themselves to survive. I went home that night and sat at my desk until sunrise, writing. Not for the essay column this time. For me. I wrote a letter I would never send. To Marlene. I wrote about the first time I stepped into her home. About the missing dinner plate. About the way Andrea took my seat without blinking. About how I waited, for kindness, for inclusion, for acknowledgement, and how that wait never ended. I wrote about David. How I had loved him. How I still might in some distant, dulled way. But how love couldn't survive silence. Then I folded the letter and locked it in a drawer. Sometimes justice isn't about confrontation. Sometimes it's about clarity. That clarity began to show itself in unexpected ways. A former Langston business partner reached out to the ghost room. He'd read the essay. Realized the patterns in the way Marlene spoke about female clients. How David deferred in meetings, always glancing toward his mother before agreeing to anything. He didn't want an exposé. He wanted a conversation. So we set up a private video call. Him, me, Alicia, and Lindsay. We explained the culture. The silencing. The erasure. He listened. And then he ended his partnership with the Langston firm. That marked the beginning of a slow, visible unraveling. One by one their community ties began to strain. Clients left. Associates quietly cut ties. Marlene was no longer on the invite list for the foundation galas she once hosted. No one shamed her. No headlines were written. Just space, distance created by truth. Then David called again. But this time he didn't leave a voicemail. He texted instead. I've been going to therapy. I don't expect you to answer. I just wanted you to know. I stared at the message for a long time. He didn't ask to come back. Didn't ask for forgiveness. Just a fact. I didn't reply. But later that night I found myself remembering the version of him I fell in love with. The one who made me tea when I stayed up late working. The one who asked how my day was and really listened. That version of him still existed, maybe buried, maybe bruised. But it wasn't my job to excavate him. I had already done my part. And I had healed more in the months without him than I ever had in the years beside him. It was around this time that a small, independent publisher reached out. One of their editors had read my essay and attended the panel we hosted on the Ghost Room. They wanted to publish a collection. Stories from women who had been made invisible in their own families. They wanted me to curate it. At first I hesitated. What if it was too personal? Too raw? Then I remembered Alicia's words during our first coffee together. You gave me the words I never had. So I said yes. We titled it, Unseen, Stories from the Ghost Room. Submissions poured in from every state, every walk of life. Women who had been excluded from inheritance conversations. Mothers erased from their children's lives after divorce. Daughters-in-law treated like tenants. And each story ended the same way, not with bitterness but with reclamation. Quiet justice. Survival. Refusal to be erased. The book was published quietly. No book tour, no big PR push. But it spread. Slowly. Like a ripple. And one day as I passed a local bookstore window on my way home I saw it. In the front display. Unseen, facing outward, beside titles by women I'd once dreamed of reading beside. I stood there for a moment. Not crying. Not smiling. Just breathing. I existed. I had proof. Weeks later I received a final letter. Handwritten. No return address but I recognized the handwriting. David. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. Inside was a single page. You were always real. I just didn't know how to make space for something real in a house built on pretense. I let my silence become complicity. I know you don't owe me anything but I hope you know. I see you now. I'm sorry it took this long. No requests. No, I miss you. Just acknowledgement. And it felt right. Like the end of a chapter. Not closure, because some stories don't close. But completion. A full circle. I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of the unseen copy I kept on my shelf. Not to cherish it. To remember. Where I began. Where I ended. And who I became in the in-between. The Langston house still stands. But from what I've heard it's emptier now. Marlene rarely hosts anymore. Andrea moved to the coast citing a need for space. David is rebuilding. Alone. Me. I'm not looking back. Because survival isn't just about escaping. It's about choosing yourself again and again. Even when no one else will. Especially when no one else will. Healing doesn't look like how they show it in movies. There's no montage. No sunrise epiphany. No grand symbolic moment where you throw out the old and walk into the new. Healing is slower. Quieter. It's the way your hands stop trembling when you wake up. The way silence stops sounding like a threat. The first time you go a full day without replaying old conversations in your head. Small, almost invisible, but you feel it. And I was starting to feel it, finally. After Unseen was published, I thought the moment had passed. I assumed the wave of stories, the private messages, the praise and validation, it would fade like most things on the internet do. But instead something happened I never expected. It stayed. Women continued reaching out. Some shared their own erasure, their quiet exits, their private documents, their receipts. Some told me they hadn't left yet, but reading the stories gave them the courage to plan. And others said simply, "Thank you for reminding me that I'm not crazy." That's what so many of us needed. Not revenge, not sympathy, just confirmation that our pain wasn't imagined. And in that I found a new purpose. A local university invited me to speak. At first I wasn't sure I was ready. I was still rebuilding, still navigating who I was outside the shadow of the Langston name. But Mia reminded me, you don't have to be finished healing to help someone else start. So I agreed. It was a small auditorium. Mostly women but some men too. Professors, students, alumni. I stepped onto the stage with shaking hands but a steady heart. I told them my story, not the polished version, not the headline-ready arc. The raw version. The way I was taught to shrink. The way silence sounded in a house filled with people. The way being the quiet wife slowly became being no one at all. And then I told them about the leaving. About the receipts. About reclaiming myself, not through loud exits but through quiet, strategic justice. The room was silent when I finished. Not cold silent. Gripping silent. Listening silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. And suddenly they all did. I cried that night. Not because I was sad, but as I felt seen. Really finally seen. Around this time Alicia and I met again, this time in my new apartment. Smaller than the Langston estate, but it felt expansive in all the ways that mattered. Sunlight spilled across my modest wooden floors like a quiet blessing. We sat on the couch with wine and bare feet, flipping through the early reviews of Unseen. Alicia laughed. "Can you believe this is our life now?" I smiled. "Honestly, no. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I'm back in that house. Like I never left." She grew quiet. Then she said, "Do you ever regret not burning it all down?" I knew what she meant. There were things I could have done. Names I could have dropped. Emails I could have leaked. Stories I could have sold. But I shook my head. "No," I said. "Because I didn't leave to make them hurt. I left to make sure I didn't." She looked at me for a long time. Then nodded. We toasted to that. Later that month something surprising happened. Marlene reached out. No letter. No legal threat. Just an email. One line. "I see what you've done. I don't know how you did it, but people listen to you now. Even the ones who never listened before." That was it. No apology. No recognition of harm. Just a bitter acknowledgement of my existence. And I realized, for someone like Marlene, that was an apology. Not for what she'd done, but for no longer being able to pretend I didn't exist. I didn't respond. Because she no longer held power over me. That chapter was written, closed, published, and I was already in the next one. By fall I was hosting monthly meetups for members of the Ghost Room. Some came in person, others joined by video. We shared resources, lawyers, therapists, emergency planning tips. We cried. We laughed. We gave each other language. We stopped saying, "I feel crazy," and started saying, "This is patterned behavior." We stopped saying, "Maybe I'm overreacting," and started saying, "My experience is valid." We even launched a fund, small grants for women who needed to get out quietly. Alicia named it the Quiet Exit Fund. It wasn't charity. It was strategy. One day, while reviewing submissions for a second book, I found a piece from a woman named Grace. Her story was simple but devastating. Her in-laws had never yelled at her, never insulted her. But they spoke around her. Planned things without her. Treated her like an asterisk in her own marriage. Her husband, like David, said nothing. And over time she became someone she didn't recognize. Timid, apologetic, unsure. She ended the story with, "I'm still in the house. But now, I know I'm not the only ghost here. I reached out to her personally. And for the first time I heard myself say aloud something that had been forming in me for months. You don't need to burn bridges. You don't need to scream. You just need to stop trying to prove you belong in rooms that are designed to erase you. She cried. Then said, that's what I needed. Not advice. Permission. David messaged me again in early winter. A different tone this time. I read the book. Every page. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just hope one day I can become someone who wouldn't let that happen again. There was no manipulation in his words. No veiled hope for reconciliation. Just a man looking inward, probably for the first time in his life. I wished him well in my heart. But I didn't reply. Because healing had taught me that you don't owe access to people just because they've changed. Sometimes growth means waving from a distance. My life now is quieter than it's ever been. But not the suffocating kind of quiet. It's the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a favorite blanket. The kind that makes room for your thoughts. For your voice. I water my plants on Sunday mornings. I light candles without reason. I talk to Mia on Tuesdays. I let myself rest. Not because I earned it, but because I no longer need to. I write for myself. Not for justice. Not for proof. Just because I love it again. One afternoon I passed by the courthouse where David and I were married. The steps looked smaller than I remembered. The doors less intimidating. The memory wasn't painful, it just felt distant. Like someone else's life. I stood there for a minute. Then smiled. I had walked out of that building a wife. But I had walked out of that house a ghost. No. Now I was a woman who refused to disappear. Sometimes justice isn't a loud declaration. It's a quiet presence. One that doesn't beg to be seen but cannot be ignored. That's who I had become. The year after I left the Langston estate passed like a soft, unfolding wind. No sudden gusts, no crashing storms. Just one slow, consistent truth settling around me. I had survived. Not only that, I had rebuilt. And I stayed gone. That mattered more than anything else. Because too often women leave and are pulled back. By guilt. By love. By empty apologies dressed in sincerity. But I had closed the door and never looked back. The second book was nearing completion. This one was called Rooms Without Chairs. A collection of stories from women who weren't just excluded, but made to stand, to serve, to smile while shrinking. One of the stories came from a woman who said, they never told me to sit. But they never made space for me either. Eventually I stopped trying. It hit something in me I didn't realize still needed healing. As I had done the same. I had learned how to stand at the edge of rooms. How to smile without taking up too much space. How to nod without being asked anything real. And leaving hadn't been about rebellion. It had been about finally sitting down in a room I made for myself. One crisp spring morning, I was invited to speak at a women's summit in New York. Not because I had gone viral. Not because I had built a platform. But because my work was making quiet impact. I accepted. The summit was held in a glass building overlooking the skyline. Hundreds of women filled the room. Some survivors, some therapists, some writers, all of them living proof that we don't vanish just because someone tries to forget us. I wore white that day. Not as a symbol of purity or peace but visibility. It was the color no one could ignore in a crowd. When I stepped onto the stage there were no nerves. Only purpose. I told my story again, but not from a place of pain. This time I told it from the other side. The side where you've already left. Where you've already taken what was yours and refused to explain why. I ended my talk with this. I was treated like a ghost. So I left. I didn't scream. I didn't destroy. I didn't wait for permission. I just gathered what I gave and I walked away. And in doing so I realized, sometimes, the loudest justice is choosing yourself and staying gone. The applause was thunderous. But it wasn't the sound that moved me. It was the sight of women standing. Holding hands. Some wiping tears. Some nodding. All of them seen. Later that evening I received a message from Gerald Langston, David's father. He had read both books now. He said Marlene had gone mostly quiet in recent months. That David was doing better. Still in therapy. Living a simpler life. No PR roles, no firm partnerships. Just honest work. But he didn't write to tell me that. He wrote to say thank you. Your silence was always louder than any fight we expected. You didn't tear us down. You held up a mirror. The rest we did to ourselves. I appreciated the words. But I didn't reply. Because I didn't need to. Weeks later, Unseen hit a milestone. A national morning show selected it for their Voices That Changed Us feature. They wanted an interview. A public one. At first I hesitated. Then I remembered what this journey had been about from the very beginning. Erasure. And there is no better answer to erasure than being seen. Fully, unapologetically on your own terms. So I said yes. The studio was bright and polished, cameras positioned from every angle. The host was warm and familiar, but when she introduced me as the woman whose quiet departure sparked a national conversation on familial erasure, I felt a pause in my chest. That title, that truth, it landed. I was no longer someone who had been silenced. I was someone who had taken silence and built an empire of truth from it. She asked me the final question. If you could say one thing to your past self, the version of you who sat at that family table in silence, what would you say? I didn't hesitate. You don't have to earn a seat where you're not welcome. You're not invisible. You're just in the wrong room. The interview went live. People called. Sent emails. Messages poured in from women, men, even teenagers. People who had watched someone they loved be erased and didn't know how to name it. Now they did. One day while walking through downtown Chicago, I passed a bookstore window again. There was. Both unseen in rooms without chairs, side by side. Next to them a handwritten sign. For the ones who stayed too long in places that forgot they were human. I stood there for a moment. Then I walked inside. I bought a copy of each. Not because I didn't have them at home. But because I wanted to place them, one by one, on my coffee table. Proof. Not of pain. But of survival. And then I did something else. I invited a few women over from the ghost room. Just 6 of us. Nothing formal. No agenda. We drank tea. Laughed. And for the first time in a long time I hosted. Not to impress. Not to serve. But to share space. My space. My table. A place where no one had to shrink. As they left, one of them hugged me tightly and whispered, "You're not just the woman who left. You're the woman who stayed gone." That stayed with me. Because leaving is hard. But staying gone? That's where the real strength lives. It's been 2 years now. Since the night I took everything I paid for and left without a word. People still ask me if I would have done anything differently. I always say no. Because that silence, it wasn't surrender. It was strategy. It was survival. It was mine. So if you're watching this and you're sitting at a table where you're treated like a ghost, if you're surrounded by people who claim to love you, but speak around you like you're furniture, if you're waiting for someone to pull out a chair for you at a table you set, let me say what no one said to me. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to burn it down to start over. You don't even need a goodbye. You just need to take what is yours, your peace, your voice, your dignity, and walk away. Quietly. Precisely. Completely. And never ever look back. Because the moment you do that, you're no longer the ghost. You're the writer of your own story. And trust me, it's one hell of a story to live. The end.